Think about those big life moments, the ones that often feel like they have a timeline, whether anyone says it out loud or not. Getting married, having your first kid, buying a house, even figuring out when to retire. Have you ever just stopped and wondered, like, is there actually a right time for all this stuff?
That's exactly where we're headed in this deep dive today. We've been digging into some really fascinating data, especially a Pew Research Center study, and looking at some related info too. It sort of pulls back the curtain on what Americans as a whole think are the, let's say, ideal ages for these major milestones: marriage, first child, first home, and, hanging up your work boots.
Okay, so our goal here is to explore these sort of perceived best ages across the country. But honestly, what seems even more compelling is looking at all the different viewpoints within those averages. It's easy to think there's this like standard script, right? But this research really shows how varied our expectations and, well, our timelines can actually be.
Exactly. And while everyone's life story is unique, understanding these broader societal views can give some really helpful context. It gives us a sense of the, common expectations floating around, even as we're all just figuring out our own paths.
All right, let's dive right in then. If we look at the US overall, what are these ideal ages that people seem to land on?
So according to that Pew study from early 2025, the average age U.S. adults think is best for getting married is about 26 and a half. For having a first child, it's right around 27.3 years old. Buying a home, that comes in a bit later, roughly 28.8 years old. And the average ideal age people cited for retirement is 61.8.
Huh. Those are pretty specific averages. It almost sounds like there's a national agreement. But what really jumped out, I thought, was that a pretty big chunk of people actually believe there isn't any single best age for these things. What's going on there?
Yeah, that's a really, really crucial point to highlight. For every single one of these major life events, you've got somewhere between like a third and almost half of the Americans surveyed saying basically, nope, there's no one ideal age. It just underscores how personal these choices really are for so many people. What feels right for one person at, say, 25 might be completely wrong for someone else.
Totally makes sense. Life isn't a paint by numbers kit. Now, the study also gave a peek into what people in other countries think. How do these U.S. averages stack up internationally?
It's interesting. When the researchers looked at 18 other countries, mostly middle-income ones, the average answers for marriage and having that first child were actually quite similar to the U.S., both kind of hovering around 26. Buying a home, though, tended to be seen as best a little later, closer to 30 on average internationally. And retirement, a bit earlier, around 58.
Yeah.
So yeah, there are differences, but that general timing for the early family stuff seems to resonate across quite a few cultures.
That global perspective is really interesting. It's almost like there's a widely felt sense, maybe subconsciously, of when some of these initial steps might ideally happen, but then, uh-oh, we have to face reality because these ideal ages, they don't always line up with when things actually happen, do they?
Not at all. And this is where you connect it to the bigger picture. Think about buying that first house. The median age for actual first-time homebuyers in the U.S., according to other data we looked at, is much closer to 38. That's nearly a whole decade later than that ideal average of 28.8 people mentioned.
Wow, 38 versus 28.8, that's a huge gap.
It really is. Now, with starting a family, it's closer. The ideal age was around 27.3, and the typical age for a first birth for women in the U.S. is about 27.4. So that's pretty much aligned. But that homeownership difference, yeah, that really makes you pause and think.
Right. And here's where it gets really interesting, I think. Why is there such a big difference, especially with buying a home? Is it purely economic realities? Are personal priorities shifting? Or is it, something else entirely pushing that timeline back? It makes you consider the pressures and maybe the challenges people are facing trying to line up their lives with these perceived ideals.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the study starts to give us some clues by looking at how these ideal ages actually vary across different demographic groups. Turns out these views aren't monolithic at all.
Okay, let's get into those differences then. What were some of the main demographic factors that seem to influence people's views on the best timing?
Well, one pretty clear factor was political affiliation. The research showed that Democrats and people leaning Democratic generally favor slightly later ages for getting married, having kids, and buying a home compared to Republicans and those leaning Republican. But interestingly, Democrats on average actually saw a slightly younger ideal retirement age than Republicans did.
Huh, that's quite a twist on retirement. What might be behind those different timelines based on political views? Could it be tied to maybe different outlooks on economic security or the role of social structures?
It's definitely plausible. Different political ideologies often carry different perspectives on things like economic policy, social safety nets, individual responsibility, all stuff that could easily influence when someone feels ready or even able to take on these huge life steps.
Yeah.
And yeah, also when they think they might be able to retire.
Makes sense. What about age itself? Do younger folks and older adults see the timing differently?
Oh, absolutely. There's some really clear age-related differences. Younger adults, those under 30, generally think the best age for marriage and having kids is later than older adults do,
Hmm.
especially compared to those 65 and older. But, and this is a really significant contrast, those younger adults tend to imagine a much younger ideal retirement age than the older generations.
That's fascinating. It almost points to like a generational shift in priorities, maybe. Younger people perhaps focusing more on career building before settling down, and maybe they just have totally different expectations about their working lifespan and when retirement might even be possible.
Exactly. Then you see the influence of income. The study found that people in upper-income households generally believe in later ideal ages for marriage, having kids, and even for retiring compared to folks in lower-income households.
That really seems to highlight how financial security, or at least the feeling of financial security, can shape these timelines, doesn't it? If you have more resources, maybe you feel you've got more flexibility to wait until you feel absolutely ready for those big steps.
That's a very good way to put it. And one more factor the study touched on was religion. It seems individuals for whom religion is very important tend to see slightly younger ideal ages for both getting married and having children.
So, deeply held values, spiritual beliefs, those also clearly play a role in shaping these personal and, I guess, societal expectations. It's pretty amazing how all these different threads, politics, age, income, religion, all weave together.
Yeah, what's really compelling is seeing how these decisions, which feel so incredibly personal, right, are actually influenced by this whole complex web of demographic factors and broader societal currents.
Okay, so we've looked at the big picture averages and then zoomed in on how different groups see these ideal ages. What are the main things our listeners should really take away from this deep dive?
I think the most crucial takeaway is remembering these are perceptions of ideal ages. They're not, hard and fast rules for living a successful life.
Hmm.
And they definitely don't capture the huge range of individual circumstances that shape everyone's unique journey.
And it's so important to circle back to that point you made earlier that a really significant number of people don't even buy into the idea of a single best age anyway. That really validates the idea that, hey, everyone's timeline is different and that's totally okay.
Precisely. While this Pew Research data gives us a really valuable snapshot of current American thinking on these milestones, the main message really is the incredible diversity within those attitudes. Yes, there's an average, but when you dig down, you find this really rich tapestry of beliefs shaped by everything from your politics to your paycheck to your personal values.
So, for you listening, maybe this research just serves as a good reminder that, yeah, there might be societal benchmarks out there, but your own right time, that's ultimately down to your circumstances, your goals, and just what feels right for you.
And it raises a pretty big question for everyone, doesn't it? How do these findings, resonate with your own life, your own expectations? What parts of these different viewpoints really stand out to you?
We really hope this deep dive has given you some valuable insights and definitely some food for thought. If you enjoyed exploring this with us, please do like and subscribe. It really helps other people discover these kinds of discussions. And hey, we're always looking for new things to dig into, so please drop your suggestions for what you'd like us to unpack next right there in the comments.
And maybe a final thought to bow on.
Yeah.
Considering these perceived best ages we talked about, how might ongoing shifts, economic changes, evolving social norms, how might those things continue to reshape these timelines in the years to come?
Wait for ending.